I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I never expected to be the kind of man to snoop through his wife's things. In our 10 years of marriage, I trusted Diane implicitly. She was warm, dedicated to her career in pharmaceuticals, and to all appearances, committed to our family. But that Saturday afternoon, as I cleaned out the garage and stumbled upon her old suitcase, a glint of suspicion began to surface, like the first hint of a crack in a windshield. I'd never questioned her trips, her overtime, or her late-night meetings. But I also never thought she'd kept secrets from me. I had pulled the suitcase down from a dusty corner, planning to move it to the basement with the other long-forgotten baggage. When I opened it, the items inside seemed like typical travel souvenirs at first. There were knickknacks, postcards, and keychains, things I'd seen her bring back before from conferences and work-related trips. But as I sifted through them, a sinking feeling began to grow in my stomach. Most of the trinkets bore names of places I'd never heard her mention, a keychain from some bar in Orlando, a magnet from a beach town we'd never discussed. A nagging thought struck me: Diane had never mentioned Orlando in all the years she'd claimed to be on the road for work. I wanted to brush it off, to let it go. But curiosity can be relentless. That evening, while Diane was still at work, I decided to see if these souvenirs had any basis in her work calendar. Her email was easy to access since we'd shared passwords over the years. I opened it, half expecting to find nothing out of the ordinary. But as I scrolled through her messages, I stumbled upon a name that kept reappearing in her correspondence: Jeremy. There were dozens of emails, some work-related, others far too personal to ignore. They spoke of "missed you, next time," and "keeping things under wraps." I sat there, staring at the screen, my world teetering on the edge. I remembered our last big argument about her work trips. She had defended them so passionately, accusing me of being paranoid. At the time, I felt ashamed for doubting her. She had a job that demanded travel, and I'd supported her ambitions, even when it left me to handle things at home on my own. But now, every reassuring word she'd said in those moments echoed back at me like taunts. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was shattering. I didn't confront her right away. I needed more than just suspicion and a few emails. The next day, while she was out for a supposed girls' day, I went through our shared finances. Hotel charges, late-night meals, and unexplained expenses painted a grim picture. Each transaction confirmed what I dreaded. Places she'd never told me she'd visited, expenses she'd never bothered to explain. All I wanted was an answer, but I knew that with Diane, any confrontation would be met with deflection. She was skilled at steering conversations, at explaining things away with practiced ease. I needed undeniable proof. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I went back to her emails, digging deeper. There were messages to friends, detailing elaborate stories she'd spun about the exciting conferences she'd attended. She'd even shared some of these tales with our daughter, painting herself as a dedicated career woman, sacrificing time with family for the sake of work. In reality, she was spending weekends in luxury hotels with Jeremy, whining and dining on what I'd once thought were professional expenses. A sudden bitterness rose in me as I thought of all the times I'd picked up the slack at home, all the hours I'd poured into making things easy for her, assuming she was doing the same for us. For the next week, I went through my days on autopilot, hiding the turmoil inside me. Diane continued her routines, oblivious to my growing knowledge. Our daughter, Sonia, stayed with a friend one night, and Diane suggested we make the most of it. Her touch felt foreign, a betrayal wrapped in affection. I couldn't stand the thought of her lies, her secret life seeping into every part of our home. Yet, I bit my tongue, knowing that my anger would only push her to deny everything, to fabricate yet more excuses. Finally, I decided it was time to confront her, to see if there was any honesty left in her. One Friday evening, after she returned from another work trip, I sat her down. She looked tired, though I'd stopped believing that fatigue was from anything resembling real work. I began with simple questions, soft and unassuming. She answered them with ease until I brought up Orlando. Orlando, she repeated, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. What about it? You never mentioned you traveled there, I said, keeping my tone even. Yet I found a few souvenirs in your suitcase. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she'd confess. Instead, she attempted to laugh it off, claiming it was just a random conference she hadn't thought to mention. But the laughter fell flat. She must have sensed my disbelief because she quickly changed her story, saying that her company had arranged some last-minute meetings there. But as she spoke, I saw the panic beginning to creep into her gaze, the way her hands fidgeted in her lap. I know about Jeremy, I said, the words finally spilling out. Silence fell between us, the weight of it thick in the air. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. After a moment, she began to stammer, weaving a patchwork of half-hearted excuses. It wasn't serious, she claimed, just a fling. She blamed her long hours, the stress, anything she could grasp at to soften her betrayal. But I wasn't looking for excuses. I was looking for honesty, something she could no longer offer. Diane attempted to turn the conversation around, saying that I was partly to blame, that my dedication to my job had left her lonely. I realized then that she wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was only sorry for being caught. The memory of our years together, our shared laughter, our plans, all seemed distant, almost surreal. The woman in front of me wasn't the Diane I thought I knew. She was someone else, someone who had betrayed me and didn't even seem to regret it. That night, as she went to bed, I knew things would never be the same. In the darkness of our room, her breathing steady beside me, I lay wide awake, a hollow ache in my chest. I thought of Sonia, of what this would mean for her, how our family was about to be torn apart. But I also felt a strange sense of resolve. Diane had her secrets, her lies, her excuses. But I had something else, the will to move forward without her. In the days following our confrontation, Diane continued to act as though we could somehow return to normal. It was like she'd built a wall around the reality of what she'd done, convincing herself it wasn't a big deal. I watched her move around the house, calmly pouring coffee in the mornings, giving me the occasional tight-lipped smile, even attempting casual conversation over dinner. She seemed to think that because she'd explained herself, I'd forgive her, as if all could be washed away with a flimsy apology and vague promises to do better. But my trust was shattered, and every one of her small gestures, each "I love you," felt like a blade slicing deeper. My anger was a steady burn, something I kept close to my chest, waiting for the right time to let it out. I wasn't ready to forgive, and the more she pretended that we could, the more determined I became to make sure she felt the consequences of her betrayal. That weekend, while she was out, I reached out to a lawyer. I didn't tell Diane, and I didn't make any grand announcements. I just wanted to know my options, how I could move forward without her. The lawyer's voice on the other end of the line was calm and professional, and it was oddly comforting. I explained my situation, trying to keep my voice steady, even as the humiliation of it all began to bubble up. The lawyer listened and gave me practical advice: document everything, keep records, and, most importantly, stay calm. This process, he explained, would take time. Taking the lawyer's advice, I began to keep track of Diane's work trips and her phone calls, each new entry a reminder of how little I'd truly known her. Diane remained oblivious, acting as if she was the wronged party, resentful that I hadn't moved past it already. I could see her frustration every time I greeted her with cool silence or a nod instead of the warmth I once gave. She didn't apologize again. It was as if she believed that, having admitted her affair, she was absolved of guilt, free to carry on as she wished. She still went out with friends, still took the same business trips. I couldn't believe her audacity, but instead of confronting her, I let it play out. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to see the cracks widening between us. One morning, as she was packing for yet another work conference, she paused in the doorway, a hint of frustration in her eyes. "James, are you really going to keep acting like this forever?" "It's been over a month," she said, as if she were talking about some petty argument, not an affair that had torn our family apart. I looked at her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Diane, I don't think you understand the damage you've done," I replied, my voice low but steady. She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "It was one mistake. People make mistakes all the time, James. Do you want to ruin our family over a single slip-up?" My patience snapped. "A single slip-up? Diane, it wasn't one mistake. It was months of lying, of planning, of sneaking around. You used our family, our daughter, to cover for your affair." The words were out before I could stop them, and I watched as her face shifted, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe if you'd been more present, I wouldn't have felt so lonely," she shot back. "Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere." I felt the weight of her words settle, heavy and cold. She was trying to twist the blame, to make me responsible for her actions. It was almost laughable, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Instead, I just looked at her, feeling the last vestiges of affection drain away. "You know what, Diane? Believe what you want. But don't expect me to forgive you for something you're not even sorry for." She huffed, slinging her bag over her shoulder, her face a mask of disdain. "Fine. If that's how you feel." And with that, she walked out, the door slamming behind her. After she left, I sat down, feeling the weight of everything settle over me. The realization hit me hard: Diane wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to apologize. She was going to keep blaming me, keep making excuses. And I knew, then and there, that I couldn't keep pretending this was salvageable. My life with Diane, the life I'd fought to preserve, was over. Over the next few weeks, I continued to meet with my lawyer, gathering documents and evidence, building a case for divorce. Each day felt like a step closer to freedom, a step further away from the person who'd betrayed me. I spoke to friends, discreetly at first, letting them know the truth about what had happened. Most were shocked, unable to believe that Diane, the devoted wife and mother they thought they knew, had been leading a double life. But they rallied around me, offering support and a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Then came the day I'd been dreading, the day I had to tell Sonia. She was only 19, but mature enough to understand. I'd seen her growing quieter around the house, more withdrawn, as if sensing the tension between Diane and me. One evening, while Diane was out, I sat down with her in the living room, the weight of what I was about to say pressing down on me. "Sonia, there's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, worry flickering in her eyes. "Is it about Mom?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes. Sonia, your mother, she hasn't been honest with us. She's been seeing someone else, someone from her work. I tried to make it work, but it's too much. I can't keep pretending everything is fine." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. Then, to my surprise, she sighed, a hint of relief washing over her face. "I knew something was wrong, Dad," she admitted. "Mom's been so distant. I thought it was my fault. I thought I'd done something wrong." I reached over, pulling her into a hug. "Sonia, this isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. This is between your mom and me. I just need you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." She hugged me back, her arms tight around my shoulders. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I just want things to be okay again." In that moment, I felt a surge of resolve. No matter what happened, no matter how difficult the road ahead, would be there for Sonia. I would rebuild, I would recover, and I would make sure that she had a stable, loving home. Diane might have shattered our family, but I wasn't going to let her destroy it completely. Later that night, Diane returned home, oblivious to the conversation I'd had with Sonia. She slipped into bed beside me, the smell of perfume and something else lingering on her clothes. I lay there in the dark, listening to her steady breathing, feeling the weight of her presence like a stone in my chest. I thought about the life we'd shared, the memories we'd made, the future we'd planned together. And in that darkness, I felt the last shreds of love I had for her dissolve, replaced by a cold, hard determination. She had made her choices, and now I would make mine. With Sonia's understanding and the support of a few close friends, I felt like a fog was finally lifting. I was no longer a spectator in my own life, trapped by Diane's choices. For the first time in months, I was taking control. I could see it in Sonia, too. She was calmer, more herself. Our conversations were lighter, and laughter even found its way back into the house. It was bittersweet knowing that things might never be the same, but it was also freeing. This was our chance to start fresh. One evening, my lawyer and I went over the final steps for filing the divorce. His advice had been invaluable: keep things civil and strategic, especially with the assets and any custody discussions. Let's make sure you get what's fair, he'd said. We reviewed our assets, the bank accounts, and even the house where I'd planned to grow old with Diane. I'd decided to fight for it. I wanted stability for Sonia and me, a place where we could heal without the disruption of packing up and starting over somewhere new. Diane's absence became more frequent as the days wore on, and it wasn't long before I realized she was spending almost every weekend with Jeremy. She'd gotten bolder, less careful, as if she believed I'd resigned myself to our cold routine. I would watch her head out the door with that same casual, "See you later," she used to say when things were good between us. It took all my self-control not to respond, to simply nod or murmur, "Take care." I needed her to believe that I was past it, that I didn't care anymore. One night, she returned home after midnight. Sonia had gone to bed early, and I was in the living room, the dim glow of the TV casting shadows across the room. Diane stumbled in, smelling of expensive wine and faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. I looked up as she entered, my expression blank. She tried to walk past me without saying anything, but I stopped her. "How was your work dinner?" I asked, not bothering to mask the sarcasm in my voice. She froze, her hand still on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought she'd try to lie again, but she just sighed, brushing her hair back with a tired hand. "James, I don't want to fight tonight." "Neither do I, Diane. In fact, I don't want to fight ever again. I want us to move on from this." I gestured vaguely, encompassing the tension, the betrayal, the hurt that filled the space between us. Her eyes flickered with something, maybe relief, maybe guilt. "You want to move on?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Yes," I said, barely containing the bitterness in my voice. "I think it's time we both move on." She relaxed, even smiled a little, as though she'd won something. "Well, I'm glad you're finally coming around," she said, not realizing the irony. "It's been a long time coming, I guess." I watched her walk down the hall, her steps light, her shoulders loose. I felt a mix of anger and strange satisfaction. Diane believed she'd taken control, that I was bowing out gracefully. But what she didn't realize was that I was preparing for the real end. I had a timeline now, a plan. Soon enough, Diane would find out just how wrong she'd been. The next morning, I finalized the paperwork. My lawyer was impressed by how thorough I'd been, collecting evidence and documenting everything. We discussed how to approach the division of assets and worked on a proposal for joint custody, ensuring that Sonia's well-being was the priority. "Keep things civil," he reminded me. "The more cooperative you are, the harder it'll be for her to paint you as the villain." Once I was prepared, I decided on one final step: confronting Jeremy. I didn't want some melodramatic showdown, I just needed him to understand the damage he'd caused, to see the face of the man whose life he'd so casually disrupted. Through a few mutual acquaintances, I found out where he worked, a law firm downtown, tucked into one of those polished high-rises with tinted windows. One afternoon, I left work early and drove there, my heart pounding as I parked my car across the street. I waited until I saw him leaving the building, strolling down the sidewalk, phone in hand, exuding the confidence of a man who believed he had everything under control. As he walked past me, I stepped into his path. He looked up, startled, and for a brief moment, I saw a flash of recognition in his eyes. He knew who I was. "Jeremy," I said, my voice steady. He hesitated, a flicker of panic crossing his face, but he quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" he asked, as though he hadn't been spending his nights with another man's wife. I took a breath, fighting the urge to throw a punch. "I just wanted you to know that I'm aware of everything. I know about you and Diane." He blinked, his smile faltering. "Listen, I don't think." I cut him off, my voice low. "I don't care about your excuses, and I'm not here to threaten you. I just wanted you to see the person whose life you decided to step into, uninvited. I wanted you to understand that what you did has consequences." He looked away, his composure slipping. I didn't mean for things to get complicated." "She never." "Save it," I said, not bothering to let him finish. "This isn't about your feelings or her excuses. This is about respect, something you clearly don't understand." I stared at him, watching as the shame seeped into his expression, his confident posture beginning to wilt. "You've done enough damage, Jeremy. I hope it was worth it." Without another word, I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of his silence behind me. I hadn't expected it to make me feel better, but in a strange way, it did. I'd confronted him, looked him in the eye, and left him standing there, exposed. He couldn't hide from the truth anymore, just as Diane wouldn't be able to. That night, when I returned home, Diane was in the living room, flipping through a magazine as if it were any other evening. I sat down across from her, letting the silence settle around us. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and measured. "I filed for divorce." She looked up, stunned. For a moment, her eyes widened, her hands frozen on the page she'd been pretending to read. Then, slowly, she composed herself, the mask slipping back into place. "You're serious?" "Yes, Diane. I'm serious." I took a steady breath, meeting her gaze. "I've given you enough chances, enough time. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine." She seemed to struggle for a response, her voice wavering slightly. "James, we don't have to do this. We can still fix things." "It's too late," I said simply. "You already decided what our marriage was worth." Her face twisted, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "This is because of Sonia, isn't it? You're just trying to make me look like the bad guy in front of her." "This isn't about Sonia, Diane. It's about you and me. It's about trust and respect, things you decided weren't important." I could see the realization dawning in her eyes, the understanding that I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't going to back down. The rest of the evening passed in silence, Diane retreating to the bedroom while I stayed in the living room, letting the weight of it all settle over me. For the first time, I felt a sense of relief, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd be able to build a life without her. A life that Sonia and I could shape together, free from lies and betrayal. As I sat there, watching the darkness deepen outside the window, I knew that the hardest part was over. Diane would fight, of course, she'd make it difficult, drag things out, maybe even try to turn Sonia against me. But I was ready. I was done playing her game, done with the lies. It was time to start over, time to leave the past behind. The next few months would be a battle, but I was ready. I would rebuild, I would protect Sonia, and I would find peace. The weeks passed slowly, filled with paperwork, negotiations, and the occasional terse conversation with Diane. True to form, she tried to play the martyr, accusing me of tearing our family apart, shifting blame for her choices onto my decision to file for divorce. But I was past caring. Each encounter felt like a step closer to freedom. Sonia was my rock. She was hurt, yes, but she'd been remarkably mature, navigating the emotional storm with strength I hadn't expected. We spent more time together, finding comfort in each other's company. I took her to her favorite restaurants, spent weekends watching her favorite shows with her, and slowly, bit by bit, we were rediscovering what peace could feel like. One evening, after dinner, she looked at me with an intensity that took me by surprise. "Dad, are you happy with how this is all going?" she asked. I thought about it, searching for the right words. "Not happy, no. But I am at peace, Sonia. I think this is what we need to move forward." She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I hope so, too." Diane, meanwhile, continued her routine, but with a certain restlessness I hadn't seen before. She seemed to grow more uncomfortable each time she saw Sonia and me together, our bond strengthening while her influence faded. I could sense her irritation, her frustration at being left out, and in a twisted way, it felt satisfying. Then, one weekend, while Diane was away, Sonia and I had a quiet night planned, popcorn, a movie, just the two of us. As we settled onto the couch, Sonia's phone pinged. She glanced at it, and a strange look crossed her face. "Who is it?" I asked, sensing her hesitation. She looked at me, eyes conflicted. It's Jeremy," she whispered, the surprise evident in her tone. I froze, taken aback. "Jeremy? Why is he messaging you?" She handed me the phone, her hands trembling. "He sent me a message on Instagram. I don't even know how he found me." I took the phone, my pulse quickening as I read his message. "Hey, Sonia. I just wanted you to know that I'm here if you ever want to talk. I know this must be hard, and I want you to know that I care about you, too. Your mom and we're here for you, whatever you need." The words burned on the screen, each line twisting the knife deeper. How dare he reach out to her? How dare he try to play the part of some caring figure, as if he hadn't already done enough damage to our family? I looked at Sonia, who was staring at me, wide-eyed, waiting for my reaction. "Sonia, I'm so sorry you had to see this," I said, my voice thick with anger. "He has no right." She took a deep breath, looking more resolved than I'd ever seen her. "I don't want anything to do with him," she said firmly. "I don't want him messaging me or pretending to care. He's the reason we're going through all of this." Pride and relief washed over me. "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Then we'll make sure he never contacts you again." That night, I sat alone, my mind racing. I knew Diane was desperate to cling to what she had with Jeremy, but I hadn't realized she'd pull Sonia into it, that she'd allow him to reach out to our daughter without even telling me. It was a violation, and I wasn't about to let it slide. The following week, I confronted Diane about it, keeping my voice calm but unyielding. "If Jeremy ever contacts Sonia again, I'll make sure he faces consequences. I'm done with you both trying to drag her into your mess." Diane looked caught off guard, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I didn't know he would message her," she insisted, though her tone was defensive. "He was just trying to help." "Help?" I nearly laughed. "The only help he could offer is staying out of her life." For once, she had no retort, and she quickly left the room, avoiding my gaze. I took some satisfaction in knowing I'd finally struck a nerve. After that incident, Diane's demeanor began to change. She seemed distracted, restless, spending hours out of the house without explanation. And when she was home, she grew distant, rarely looking me in the eye. Her confidence seemed to erode with each passing day, as if something was haunting her. Then, one evening, she sat across from me at the dining table, her face pale, her hands shaking. I hadn't seen her like this since the confrontation that ended our marriage. She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. "James," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I made a terrible mistake." I folded my arms, waiting, a chill creeping over me. "What now, Diane?" She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the table. "Jeremy. He wasn't who I thought he was." I frowned, unsure where this was going. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, struggling for words. He's been taking money from me, saying it was for our future together. But I recently found out he's been using it to gamble. He's in debt, a lot of debt, and he's been lying to me about everything." She looked up, her eyes haunted. "He even tried to ask me to take out a loan to cover him." A cold satisfaction bubbled up inside me, though I kept my expression neutral. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" She sighed, the weight of her choices finally bearing down on her. "I don't expect anything. I wanted you to know. I thought he was someone I could build a life with, someone who understood me." Her voice cracked. "But it turns out he's just been using me." For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered the months of betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. Diane was finally facing the consequences of her choices, and I felt no need to soften the blow. "I warned you, Diane," I said, my voice steady. "I told you there would be consequences." She looked away, her shoulders slumping. For once, she had nothing left to say, no more lies, no more excuses. She was just defeated. In the days that followed, Diane's relationship with Jeremy unraveled completely. She moved into a small apartment, and for the first time, I felt the true weight of freedom. Sonia and I began to settle into a new rhythm, finding solace in the stability we'd built together. Diane's influence faded from our lives, her betrayal a wound that had finally begun to heal. Then, one evening, as Sonia and I were enjoying a quiet dinner, her eyes met mine across the table, her expression thoughtful. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you." I set down my fork, concern flashing through me. "What is it, sweetheart?" She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I knew about Mom and Jeremy before you did. I found out about their relationship months ago." The room seemed to shift, my mind struggling to process her words. "What? How long have you known?" "A while," she admitted, looking down at her plate. "I saw some of their messages on her phone by accident. I didn't know what to do, so I kept quiet. I thought maybe it would stop." I sat there, stunned, guilt washing over me. Sonia had carried this burden alone, the knowledge of Diane's betrayal festering inside her. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked gently. She met my gaze, her eyes shining with tears. "Because I didn't want to hurt you, Dad. I thought it would break you." Her words struck deep, a reminder of just how much she'd shouldered to protect me. I reached across the table, taking her hand. "Sonia, I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone. But I want you to know, no matter what happens, I'm here for you. Always." She nodded, a small smile breaking through the tears. "I know, Dad. I know." In that moment, I realized something. Diane's betrayal had hurt, yes, but it hadn't destroyed us. It hadn't taken away the bond Sonia and I shared, the trust we'd rebuilt. And as we sat there, hand in hand, I felt something that had eluded me for months. Peace. No longer haunted by Diane's choices, I finally saw a future without bitterness, without regret. A future where Sonia and I could move forward, free from the shadows of the past. And that was enough.